The Jim and Terry Show, slow to the draw this morning. Sorry, my friend. Are you listening? Are you hearing it? No? You got your volume up?
Yeah, I think so.
Are you listening? Can you hear?
Well, yeah, I can hear. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I don't know which ear you got.
Well, I
you
just
got
woke
one
up.
covered and one uncovered.
I just
don't
woke
know
up and I got tangled in the covers and I couldn't get out. So
You're still sleepwalking through your day life. Isn't that funny? We were going to talk this morning about CBC, and I guess what brought this to mind was the notion of mainstream media or legacy media being so panned by the right, the conservative or GOP, or by the far right, the farther right you go, the less trust there is for mainstream media. And there's a fellow that I follow now that I've come to appreciate, whose coverage began really in 2016, 2015 with covering Donald Trump and all the inconsistencies of media coverage of that whole debacle, plus the 4 years of Trump. Ali Velshi is the journalist, and he is a MSNBC currently. But the interview is with CBC, and I thought it was worth having a look at. So with your indulgence, we'll play a clip and then react to it.
Now from New York City, Ali, good to see you.
Travis, it's great to be with you.
Listen, I know that you left Canada back in, I think it was the early 2000s, 2001 if I'm not mistaken. Tell me what that draw to the U.S. was for you.
Well, it was less of a draw and more of a what do you do when it actually happens. I had a few colleagues who had gone to work in the United States. I loved being in Toronto. I loved being in Canadian media. I wasn't really looking for it, and I think that I had to talk myself into it to say, hey, we sort of think that this is a good opportunity. It was CNN that called up, and I came down to try and do the same things I was doing in Canada. Little did I know, and it wasn't so different in 2001, how different the media market and the political market would turn out to be in the United States. Back then I was a business and economics journalist, and some days I wish I still was. It would be a simpler time than some of the things we have to deal with now every day in the news. So I miss it a lot. I came here for the adventure because that's the kind of guy I was. If somebody offered me an adventure anywhere, I would have taken it, and so I did, and I'm glad for it. And I love New York, and I love the people I work with and things here. But there's not a day when I don't think back to Canada. There's not a day when I don't just check where my passport is and make sure and give it a nice little run.
Well, listen, there's two things that I want to pick up on that you said.
Well, let's start with just the impression of going to the United States and to the market. What kind of market is it in the United States that Velshi is commenting on? What's the climate for a journalist in the United States?
Well, I don't know. There's all kinds of news. I guess you can pick and choose a lot more of what you want.
So more of it than...
More of it, bigger staff. We know that that's going to be the case on something like CNN and MSNBC and NBC. All of those are going to have bigger staffs, bigger research staff. So I think that's probably
What about the comment that he hinted at the political climate is more charged or more...
I would find that aggravating, but it is politically charged to the point of a fault, in my opinion, down there.
Do you think someone from Canada has a better grounding to manage those things than...
Well, maybe, since we're a little bit more passive up here. So you could probably not have too much anxiety down there if you're a grounded man like this man is. He's very professional, and he knows what he's doing. He's often asked to sit in when other people are off and stuff.
Yes.
He's called on because he can jump in at the last minute and do his job.
Yeah.
He's very professional that way.
Interesting that he's came to the United States, and what a time. I don't know whether it's before 9/11, after, but it's the same year, so I don't know the context of it. But what a time to go to the United States, America, as a Canadian journalist being hired by an American media company.
Yeah, and the good news being holding onto your Canadian passport and holding onto your citizenship, you can get out of there if you need
you need
to.
a parachute?
if
Just-
if you need
just in case.
there's a place you can go. You know.
All right. Well, let's go on and hear a little bit more of it. We'll decide which of these. There's two questions coming up from the CBC interviewer, and I know the people on the right are saying CBC, Communist News Network, and yeah, okay, Communist Broadcasting Corporation. Yeah, I'm still rooting for legacy media, and you know why? Because the stories have to be vetted before they get aired, whereas internet and social media, anybody.
Well,
can
they
say
also
anything.
they also have been known to make apologies.
Yeah.
When it doesn't work out like they thought it did, they'll make apologies. Unless you're Fox, you hold on to the very end.
And you get sued for $1 billion, and the
yeah.
$2 billion one's still pending. But you know, only Tucker Carlson has left Fox. But he'll get to talking about some of that stuff, I think, in a little later on in the interview. Let's keep going.
Disagreeing on what the facts are as
Right.
opposed to disagreeing on opinions about those facts.
Well, I know that you did a TED Talk back in, I think it was 2017, about disinformation. And I wonder how much worse you think that phenomenon is now in 2024 than it was in 2017.
I was such a naive innocent back then when I thought that disinformation was a really neat way for people to monetize it, to make money off of nonsense that was on the internet. That was long before I realized what would happen, what social media would end up doing, and what, you know, how disinformation would be wielded by the world's authoritarians and dictators and some mainstream politicians. I was onto something back then. The speech made sense. And it ages well. I just wasn't on to how influential it would be and how uncritical we would be as recipients of disinformation. And it comes down to that. Having covered stories all over the world, it's the same problem everywhere. It's not that people can't get the right information, even if you're in Russia. Everybody's got a VPN in Russia. You can get broader information than the censored stuff that comes to you on TV. People choose not to. And I think, Travis, that's the thing we have to most think about with our kids, to be able to say, for all the things you have to learn in school, you've got to learn critical thinking. You've got to learn how to consume media. You've got to learn how to protect yourself against the nonsense that is moving at a velocity that one's brain can't even compute.
Yeah, well, it takes me...
Okay, let's unpack that one a little bit. Critical thinking. The media is out there. Information is there. Reliable sources are out there. People choose not to access it. Why?
Well, number one, I think some people just like the thrill of rebellion, the thrill of being bad.
So going to the fringes of stuff.
Yeah, going to the fringes, wanting, somehow finding real life might be a little bit boring. So let's go to where this group of people is saying, I don't know, Trudeau's a commie,
Right.
or whatever it may be. And I like what you said earlier. If your eyebrow's going to raise, don't pass it on. Or maybe that's coming up in this thing that maybe Velshi said it. But if your eyebrow's going to raise up, don't pass it on, and wait, give it some thought, and think about it. I personally think the best frame of mind to be in this particular time in which we're in is to, unfortunately, don't take for granted everything you're hearing, whether it's mainstream or whether it's not. Give it some thought if it's important to you. But since we're being bombarded with all kinds of information constantly, all the time, I think we need to learn to sometimes shut certain things off that really are not going to affect us. Or there may be a time when it could affect us a little bit more. Because I think we're going to have a civilian nervous breakdown.
It's interesting for me because I am curious about all this stuff. I am curious about the media, so I will boldly go into the fringes just to see what's there and then say, well, what do I make of that? And put on my critical thinking hat. The skeptic in me sort of gives me some kind of safeguard that I feel emboldened to go boldly where no man has gone before, kind of thing, and investigate some darker stuff that I would not normally investigate. That's me. I have time and I have an interest in this, and I have, I think, some skill in what you in spiritual terms would call discernment and what I would call just critical thinking in terms of knowledge. But Velshi said the thing you got to get out of high school is your ability to think critically and to investigate sources. And I tried to explain this to somebody I was talking to the other day, that as a history teacher, one of the skills we do teach kids is to weigh the sources. You have primary, secondary, tertiary sources. The ones where you're listening, you actually saw it. You saw January 6th with your own eyes. You heard January 6th with your own ears. You saw the trucker convoy with your own eyes. There was so much media there. With your own ears, you could hear it. And so we learn to weigh these things. Primary is when you get there and you saw it. Secondary is when somebody is asking you a question. It's secondhand. Tertiary is even one step more removed. It's filtered by some media source. So weigh it all.
Yeah, I got three things to say. Often I say about you to myself, I don't pass it on to a reply in an email, but I say, don't you ever get tired? Like, I mean, because you're really into it. And I think that's good if you are. By George, dive into it. I think that. I think some of the knee-jerk reactions we're getting from various people, it's... unfortunately, I think it really is. Aha! Ha! I told you. I told you. And I'm going to send this out to absolutely everybody without checking anything about it. And I've often said it 1,000 times over that once you start building your army, it's awful hard to dismantle that and say, you know what, I was dead wrong. Whether it be Trudeau's just a wonderful human being, or if it was Trump. If it was Trump to
hold on to this thing about Trudeau, because I got a Joe Rogan episode about Trudeau, and we'll get there eventually. But for this thing, I just wanted to focus on mainstream media and a journalist that I respect, and that's Ali Velshi, who's now with MSNBC. But his journey from Canadian media and what he thought about Canada in terms of its media presence. And he considers himself lucky and fortunate to have been raised in Toronto and been given a fairly broad-based understanding of media and how it works in a relatively neutral environment, Canada, and then goes down to have it all lit on fire by the volatility in the American market.
And he's on a left-leaning news station. That's what he's on.
We don't even get on to saying that, but later on he starts to talk about, and he would argue that though there may be individuals who try to lean, the news is the news, and the spin is the problem. But he would not say that MSNBC is necessarily that far left. He would say it's probably middle left. Middle.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
Anyway,
I
there
won't
we go.
argue it.
Yeah, I wanted to deal with legacy media. They're still good out there. But if you reject it, you're rejecting one of your sources of information. Anyway, Jim and Terry Show. Two guys, what do we know?
What do we know?